Alrighty, let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to today's Cathedra webinar, live on October 23rd, 2025. If it is your first time attending one of our webinars, Cathedra means learning in Creek. And today you will be learning about how to stay grant ready as your organization evolves with the amazing Diane Leonard. My name is Brianna Burge, and I am the Training and Development Coordinator here at the Native Learning Center. And we're so honored that you all could join us today. And I'm just going to ask that you all will follow along as I read the disclaimer aloud. This webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. And also displayed here is our copyright infringement law. This is just a friendly reminder that the webinar presentation materials are protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, and other intellectual property laws. Before we do get started, I just want to familiarize you with the learning platform and where some things can be found. I have put the link to a PDF of today's slides in the chat. It's also in the shared notes. You can access a copy of the slides as well as access today's webinar recording in the future by going to the courses section here on our platform that's displayed on the screen. Any resource items for download will also be available within the online course when you go through the course pages. And then each time that you want to join one of the webinars going forward, you're just going to go ahead and log into the website and click on the large green banner that you see at the top of your screen here. And then when you first join the webinar, we are going to ask you to just select the listen only option. That way we can avoid any feedback. And if you need to change your speaker that your sound is playing from, you can select the phone icon down at the bottom of your screen. This is going to bring up a list of your speaker and mic devices so that you can choose your preferred audio output. And again, we are so happy that you're here. We do encourage that you participate in today's webinar, and we will primarily rely on the public chat. If you see here on the screen in the left in the left-hand gray menu panel, you can open the public chat as well as the shared notes. If you click on the public chat, you will see a chat open between webinar attendees, your NLC facilitator, as well as your webinar instructor. And you're just going to go ahead and click in the box that says send message to public chat. Type the message that you want to send and hit enter, or click on the blue paper airplane icon so that you can send your message in. You can also please send your comments that way as well, and any questions that you may have in the chat. And feel free to also use the raise hand feature in the bottom right corner of the screen if you think that we have missed something along the way, or if you have any questions. Any tech issues can also be submitted here, and I will try and do my best to support you to navigate through it, okay? And if you click on the shared notes section, you will find some helpful links. You're going to find a link, like I said, to today's feedback survey, as well as the link for the slides today. We do encourage you to complete the feedback survey just to let us know how we're doing. And you can also find a link to the location of our Cathedra Webinars archive on our YouTube channel, a link to connect with us on LinkedIn, and a link to bookmark for easy login to Cathedra Constant Learning in the future. And at this time, we'd really love to get to know you and just go ahead and chat with each other. If you feel comfortable, please just let us know your name, where you're joining us from, your tribal affiliation if you have one, and your work or role in Indian country that may have led you to today's webinar. And just one quick final note while you are introducing yourselves in the chat is to try to avoid clicking on the red menu panel on the left-hand side of your screen. If you do click that red menu panel, it's going to go ahead and take you out of the webinar, but that's okay because if you do accidentally click this, you can just rejoin by clicking on the green banner that I mentioned earlier today. And with that, it is my great pleasure to introduce you to Diane Leonard. She will be your webinar instructor. Diane, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to you.
Thank you so much, Brianna. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session. I am so happy to be here with you. We have all sorts of fun things that we're going to talk about today related to grant readiness, because no one organization stays the same from the time they start seeking grants until, well, will they ever be done seeking grants? I don't know. That's a good question. So there is so much that changes in organizations that we, as the folks who are leading the grant seeking efforts, need to be aware of, pay attention to, so that we can always be competitive. And so I'm super happy and grateful that you have all taken time out of your busy day to join us. In fact, I think I see some names that I recognize from our full 8-hour training that we just did on Tuesday about pre-planning. Am I right? I think, Michaela, were you there with us on Tuesday? I think you were. I think maybe a few of you were too. If you were with us for that big 8-hour training on Tuesday, could you give me like a quick hello, Y for yes, I was there. I learned about grants for 8 hours. That'd be really cool to see. I think a few of you were. Real quick, if you don't mind, hey, Angelica, I think that your microphone might be unmuted. If you wouldn't mind checking on your mute. Oh, thank you so much. Awesome. Thank you. Sorry to call people out, but so who am I? I'm Diane, and I love talking about all things grants. And oh, yeah, Margie was there too. Awesome. So some of you know then firsthand that I literally can talk about grants all day, and it's because I love them so much. It's not that they don't stress me out ever. Grants can certainly be stressful, but I was on the grant making side first. I was a program officer at the Michigan Women's Foundation in the earlier part of my career. And then I said, gosh, this is really stressful for grant makers. I mean, yes, stressful because they had more great proposals than they had dollars available. But I could see how stressed out the grant applicants were. And I said, I want to help those folks like you. And so 20 plus years ago, I founded D.H. Leonard Consulting. And this is what my team and I do every day. We help write applications, and we help support, teach, and coach organizations of all shapes and sizes in how to minimize the stress when possible as it relates to grants. So one other thing to know about me, and maybe you want to share this about yourself in the public chat. For me, what gets me fueled up and able to talk about grants every day is some form of movement. Now, it was raining really, really hard in far upstate New York this morning. So a little bit of strength training, but then got a quick walk in outside before today's session. So I'm checking the movement box, and you know me, I definitely had my one really big, just one though, cup of coffee this morning. I promise I have moved on to water for hydration. If you want to let me know in the public chat what is fueling your work today, I certainly would love to hear. Grant readiness is industry jargon. Grant readiness means, are you eligible and potentially competitive for the grants that you uniquely as an organization want to seek? Each organization will have their own opinion about their grant readiness, and it may or may not align with what the grant maker will think about your grant readiness. And the reality, and why we're talking about this topic today for an hour and a half together, is that an organization's grant readiness, it ebbs and it flows as there are changes within your organization. So it is not a static state. It would be amazing if it was. We become grant ready and we stay grant ready for the rest of our days, the rest of our years. Unfortunately, that is not true. So today we are going to look at what makes up grant readiness. We're going to think about some of the situations that are common in an organization that can shift grant readiness. And we're going to think about how we can be adaptive, how we can respond to change within our grant readiness so that you are always as competitive as possible. And again, we are focusing on bringing the stress down related to grants. Yes, for you personally, but big picture for your entire organization, for all of your colleagues and peers that are involved in the grant seeking process. Now, some of you have been in sessions with me before, and so you know that I mean it when I say, please do not hold your questions. I do not want you holding your questions till the end. I want to see them in the public chat right as they happen. I've got the public chat front and center on my screen so that I can see anything you say and anything you ask, because I want to answer your question in the moment. I don't want to make you wait till the end. I might also, I've been known to, just a time or two, ask you questions to check in the public chat. So you don't have to participate when I do that, but I strongly welcome you, encourage you to do so if it helps with your participation today. On the screen, what do we have here? Some of you saw this on Tuesday, right? Michaela and Margie, you've seen this image, but not all of you have. So let's walk through it together, shall we? Our grant life cycle is an image that represents the best practices in grant seeking. And we're going to approach talking through it, walking through it as if it was a clock on the wall. I want to flag that some folks will talk about these best practices as the grant life cycle. It also is referred to as the 5 R's of grant writing. I mean the same thing. There's other ways that folks will describe the best practices, but they still have these 5 components. So we're going to start at the top 12 o'clock position, like I said, as if it was a clock on the wall. And when we think about readiness, that's why we're here today. Yes, grant readiness. That industry jargon about, are we competitive? Are we eligible for all grants, for a particular grant? So we're going to spend almost all of our time here today. But I want you to think about where grant readiness sits in relation to the other grant seeking best practices. So I'd like to move clockwise around the grant life cycle, and we'll go to our second item, which is research, which means finding the funders that are a best fit for you, whether it's looking at a federal agency, whether it's looking at state funding, whether it's looking at private foundations, doesn't matter. Research as a best practice is about finding the best fit funders for you and strategically saying no to the ones that aren't the right fit. You shouldn't say yes to every funder you look at. You should pick the ones that are most competitive for you. Once we conduct our research, we're going to continue clockwise around the circle until we get to relationships. Relationships are absolutely the most important life cycle item right now. I know, you're like, why'd you pause for so long? Just for some emphasis, to draw your attention to the fact that in today's grant-seeking world, which looks very different than the grant-seeking world literally 1 year ago. If we had talked about this in October of 2024, I wouldn't have been so emphatic. I would have been emphatic, but not this emphatic about relationships. Because of the changes in the federal grant space and simultaneously the changes with AI, the level of competitiveness for literally every single grant process is through the roof. All grant makers are reporting a significant increase in applications. And what that means, you've got to focus on what makes you stand out. And that is about far more than our writing work. It is about how we are connected to grant makers, how we ask for warm introductions, how we ask questions before we apply. Relationships are going to be your gold standard for standing out in this process. Wouldn't it be great if it was like it was a handful of years ago? Your well thought out writing stood by itself, stood on its own. Now you're sitting in a pool of applicants with 900 other well-intentioned, awesome organizations, and relationships are going to be a huge part of what sets you apart. We'll talk about it a little bit today throughout readiness because it does relate to today's conversation. But we're going to assume that you have done anything and everything you can related to relationship building in the process. whether it was email, phone calls, in-person outreach, LinkedIn connections, whatever you could do, you have done something towards relationship building with a grant maker, because you want to then use that information, use what you learned to inform your writing, to make it customized for that grant maker. If you do all four, readiness, research, relationships, and then writing, if we do all four really well, that should, can't guarantee, but that should mean that you get some grant awards, hopefully lots of grant awards, which means you get to celebrate. Our team, we celebrate in lots of different ways, but at a minimum, we all love to ding our little smiley yellow dingy bells together when award notices come in. You see them in chat channels and in emails, but do something to celebrate. And then worry about that fifth best practice. Reporting, being a great grantee, grant management, doing all the things so that a grant maker would want to say, yes, I will fund you again. Technically, that is not part of grant readiness, but oh, does that set the stage for some great future funding? And when it's all done, hopefully, then the grant life cycle starts all over for you with that particular funder again. So 5 elements of our grant life cycle. I'm wondering where you think in this grant life cycle your readiness might shift, where something could happen that would make your grant readiness that you thought about and were so thoughtful about at the beginning for a particular funder. Where in the cycle do you think something could change in your organization that would suddenly shift your grant readiness? Could you let me know in the public chat, please? Go ahead and type in where in the process do you think that it could shift? What do you think could shift? All of those are welcome answers in the public chat. Where could we see a shift, or what might cause the shift? There is no shortage of answers here. I'm curious to see what comes to mind for you. Okay, Angelica says turnovers. Anywhere in the organization, in the grant funded program, in the finance department, in leadership, in the development or grant office. Yep, turnovers every time. Oh, and don't forget about turnovers actually at the grant maker, because that can influence what they think about readiness and therefore impacts what you need to think about readiness. So yes, turnovers. I wish we were talking about dessert turnovers, not staff turnovers. Well, all right, anyway. What else? Shauna says new policies. Yes, I would say internal organizational policies, some maybe community policies, and maybe funder policies. So again, many levels to your answers that y'all are sharing today. Many, many layers. I like it. So there are, you're right, many reasons and many places that all of a sudden will take our grant readiness as an organization and shake it up. It's going to be totally different than what we thought when we may have started a process. Because there's what happens inside, some of the predictable changes that might bring about grant readiness shifts. But, well, I know I don't have an elephant behind me, right? You're checking my props. You're like, wait, Diane, there's an elephant. I know, it's a virtual, invisible elephant today, but you're right. Your answers in the chat box point towards the fact that there are many reasons totally outside of your organization's control that can impact your grant readiness. That doesn't seem very fair, does it? I don't think so. In fact, I've been trying to talk about it as using an analogy related to playing like board games. We think that we're playing as grant professionals. We think we're playing the game of chess. That seems like a pretty good way to think about grants, right? You're always thinking multiple moves ahead. It's very strategic. But honestly, what's happened in 2025, all the external changes with AI and how it's impacting tools, far outside our control. All the changes with federal grant policies, far outside of our control. What game are we actually playing? I feel like maybe we're playing checkers, but with chess pieces, or maybe like Chutes and Ladders, Candyland. I'm not real sure. We're holding what we thought were the game pieces, but I think the board or at least the rules, have changed from where we were about a year ago. And so what does that mean? Well, we can commiserate around it as grant professionals. We can talk to others about it on LinkedIn. There's been a lot of conversation in like the Grant Professionals Association, their forum, the Grant Zone forum. Lots of people are talking about it. How are you handling this? What are you doing? Because lots of organizations are experiencing readiness shifts because of those external forces. Many organizations have navigated internal shifts in grant readiness before and have come out stronger. But the influence of those external factors is really what has got a lot of folks feeling a little unstable these days as it relates to their grant readiness. So we need to acknowledge that these shifts, they're happening. They've been happening in particular related to federal funding since the beginning of this calendar year. They have been happening with AI for, well, far more than 1 year, but it has really accelerated in the last few months for how we're now seeing the impact. So I wanted to acknowledge that these things are happening. They are outside of our control. And it doesn't mean that we throw our hands up and say, well, we'll see what happens. But it means that we need to thoughtfully consider what can we control so that when we're spending time on grant seeking efforts, we are putting forward our most competitive application and we're spending our time in the best way possible. So what are the key foundational things as it relates to grant readiness? I would like it if it was like a universal master key. I look at this and to me, I think of those beautiful old doorknobs and locks where you could have like a master key that would open everything. Wouldn't it be great if there were such a key as it related to grant seeking and grant readiness? Oh, I would think that is fabulous. But what we're looking for instead are things that regardless of the type of grants you're looking for or how many staff you have or how big your tribal organization is, we're looking for things that are consistently going to help build your grant readiness, make you stronger. So no one organization is going to look exactly the same as the other, but you still might be equally grant ready. And to think about grant readiness, we actually have to split the conversation for a minute. And we need to think about what makes your tribal organization grant ready versus what makes you as a tribal organization grant ready for a specific application. So can you think about what any of those differences might be? If anything comes to mind for you, I'd love to have you share in the public chat. We're going to look at both. I'm going to share some of the things that stand out for organizational readiness. And then we're going to talk about some of the things that are application specific for readiness. But I know we've got a wide range of experience in the room with us today. So if there's anything that comes to mind for you, I would love to have you share in the public chat. We should, I don't love the word should. I encourage organizations to think about their organizational readiness first. Go for the big stuff. Because while you might need to add some layers and some complexity to your grant readiness conversations, organizational readiness is going to make you ready for many different types of grants. I get it, not necessarily all, but it will make you ready for many. All right, Angelica has given us some thoughts about what could kind of differentiate between organizational and application readiness. Priorities, big organization readiness, data, application readiness. I like that. That's a nice way to put it. What are the big priorities for the organization? Ideally, numerically, sequentially ordered, maybe like 1 to 5, 1 to 6. Yep. That way we know where are we looking. And then for a particular application, having the data available to prove our need, the data maybe related to budget, the data related to past performance that shows we can do it. Lots of ways we could use that data answer for application readiness. I love it. Angelica, thank you so much for sharing. I agree. Our organizational readiness. What are the blocks that are going to make you as a tribal organization feel grant ready? Let's talk about, registration. So IRS status, a lot of organizations watch for that. Grants.gov status, yep, those all count as registration processes that we need to have in place. Depending on what state you operate within, if you are looking for state funding, there might be additional requirements. I'm based in New York State, so I am very, very familiar with their pre-qualification process. It used to be done in something called Grants Gateway. Now it's done in something called SFS, Statewide Financial System. Doesn't matter what they call it, it's got the same list of requirements. And if you don't provide all of these different documents and all of these different policies or signed documents saying why you don't have these policies, there is no chance you will be pre-qualified. Therefore, they will not let you submit. Hard stop. Cannot, will not, won't consider it. It's actually, I find, to be more burdensome as a readiness registration process than the federal system. I know, right? Good job, New York. Lots of steps. But they do it because then when you're approved, they've got a lot of that grant management stuff already on file. And so in theory, it goes faster. So I get why they do it, but it certainly makes the burden for organizations to be grant ready high. It's a very high standard for them. And we're not the only state that does that. It's just the one that I can speak to the most specifically. Now, what else do we have that makes our organization ready? Your internal capacity. We need to have other folks in the organization who are going to help make grants succeed. I had mentioned that just the other day with the Native Learning Center, we did a big day-long training. And one of the things we talked about were grant teams. So I'm curious to know, for the folks that are here with us in the room today, if you have grant teams. Now, before you answer me in the public chat, let me give you a quick description of what do I mean. A grant team is the group of colleagues who have a stake in seeing grants be successful. It does not require that you use the label grant team. It does not require that there are multiple people that have grants in their title or in their job description. It could be folks in finance. It could be folks in leadership, in programs and services, anywhere in the organization. But multiple people who have a stake in grants being successful that somehow come together to collaborate, to coordinate, to communicate about grants. So Y for yes, if you feel like you've got a grant team in place. M for maybe, N for no. And there is no judgment if you say M or N for maybe or no. I just want to get a sense of what we have happening here for grant teams in your organizations. All right. Oh, I'm getting some yeses. Oh, in fact, how fun. We have the team represented here. Jesse and Angelica are the grant team. Oh, hi, that's so fun. I'm so glad you're here. Okay, I'm seeing some yeses. I'm going to get a few more answers from you in the public chat so I know who has a grant team, who sort of or maybe has a grant team. And if some of you are like, oh, that sounds like a nice idea, haven't gotten that far with my colleagues, haven't gotten them to say yes to that yet. I want to be really clear that it is, again, not about the name that you give the group of colleagues who might collaborate. It is not about their titles. It is not about descriptions. Often grants fall into folks' daily tasks or weekly tasks as part of their other duties as assigned. And that's okay. What we want to have in terms of readiness is a group that has they agree, they've been identified, they say, yep, I will help talk about big grant strategy. They don't have to read every application. They don't have to help write any applications necessarily, but we want to have a group that agrees they are part of the conversation about overall grant strategy, setting a plan for the year, talking about maybe a high-level priority question if something comes up. Gee, does this grant fit our strategy or not? The teams have been debating, the colleagues have been debating. We need a group that's going to say, we'll decide. If you really need somebody to decide and we're really stuck, let's decide. That's the sort of grant team level I'm talking about when it comes to organizational readiness. The next item related to having our organization be grant ready is around controls and policies. And when I think about controls and policies, I'm thinking about UGG. No, not the UGG shoes. No, uniform grant guidance. Well, there was a lot of confusion in my house with my teenagers when they were younger, and I would talk about UGG, and they're like, my boots? No, talking about uniform grant guidance. It's been around for a long time, longer than you've been wearing UGGs. That joke fell flat for them. But UGG, uniform grant guidance, is really about what are the standards if you're going to be a federal grantee. Now, why would we use uniform grant guidance as a standard for organizational readiness? Because it's the highest standard. And so then when we come down to think about state funding, well, if you get state money and any of the state money came from the federal system, they're requiring that you have uniform grant guidance in terms of standards, in terms of what your accounting procedures would look like, in terms of the way you address compliance. And then if you are meeting that standard and you can say to even private foundations, we are amazing grantees, our policies, our controls, they are all uniform grant guidance compliant. And so you know that if you make a grant award to us, we are going to be amazing grantees. So that is a really nice capacity statement to make to a grant maker, regardless of who the grant maker is. So uniform grant guidance is our gold standard. It's some pretty complex stuff. There's a lot of facets to understanding all the nuances in the Code of Federal Regulations. And you might be here today not as a pre and post-award grant professional. You might be here today as, I'm air quoting big time, only pre-award. Could you let me know? Type the number 1 into the public chat, please, if you focus only on pre-award. Please type a number 2 into the public chat if you are both pre-award and post-award. That way I understand a little bit about who's here and what your focus is. I want to share a link with all of you, some of the fantastic free resources that I heavily rely on come from a team that they're colleagues of ours. And for full disclosure, I helped build their grant writing boot camp. It's their pre-award online training. But also the MyFed trainer team has previously worked with the Native Learning Center. So also well connected within the network and community. But they have a lot of free resources that you can get to through the link that I just put in the public chat. And so if uniform grant guidance to you, especially for those of you that typed 2 into the public chat, if you have not looked at their resources, I would really encourage you to take a peek. Really, really great information that gets super nuanced, like over my head nuanced about uniform grant guidance compliance stuff. I'm like, oh, so glad to have colleagues to help answer some of those questions. But take a look at that. They're free templates and the like if you're looking for any boost on controls and policies. Now, understanding strengths and needs, as well as clear goals and priorities, aligns with what Angelica said in the public chat just a few minutes ago. When we're thinking about organizational readiness, having that high-level organizational agreement around what is it that makes us absolute rock stars? What makes us the best? We need to know that answer. Certainly, there will always be needs. We need to pay for this. We need to expand that. We need to buy this new piece of equipment. There will always be a list of needs, no doubt. But rather than worrying about what that list of needs is at this moment, when we're thinking about organizational readiness, we want to know what are the strengths that we're bringing forward that would make us stand out in a process. So I would encourage you, in fact, I would welcome you to humble brag about your particular tribal organization. What is it that sets you apart against other applicants? What is something that we could call a rock star quality for your organization? Humble brags welcome in the public chat if you'd like to share what those are. If you choose to be super humble about the humble brags and you don't type them into the public chat, I understand. Sometimes it doesn't feel comfortable, but within your grant team, have a little fun brainstorming about what they are. Come up with 3 to 5 rock star qualities that you think set you apart from other organizations. That way, when you get to the organizational capacity description, whether you get a whole page or a tiny paragraph in an online portal, you draft from those agreed upon items. Organizational capacity sections are so often copied and pasted text, and that's a waste of real estate. We want to use that section to talk about what are those awesome qualities that set you apart. Now that last one is related to the second to last, but our clear goals and priorities. If we know what our strengths are, sure, we understand what our needs are financially. Where do we need the grant money? That helps to inform what is our goal, or goals, could be plural, for the year. What do we want to get grant money for? And how do we describe those as priorities? Now, what often happens when we talk to organizations about priorities, they say they're all equal, all 4, all 7, all 12 items. We need money for all of them. Not any of them are more important than the other. That is actually an issue when it comes to grant readiness. We want to be able to look at opportunities and to quickly think about, well, this one is a great fit with our top priority. We should do it. Or this one, it's a fit, but it's with priority number 12. And actually we simultaneously have to go after something for priority number 2. So we're going to prioritize the application for priority 2 over the one for priority number 12. It helps us to think about how to quickly make decisions about our team's capacity. So I'm wondering how many of you as a grants team or within your organization have a clearly listed, a sequentially ordered list of priorities for what you're seeking grant funding for this year. Y for yes, S for sort of, and for no. And when I say this year, I guess it could be that like you're coming up at the end of the calendar year, so maybe you're working on developing one for the next year. Maybe you're thinking about a different fiscal year. You get to broadly define year. But how many of you have that numerically sequentially ordered list? Okay, so we may have found a homework spot here in terms of organizational capacity. I'm really glad that everybody's candidly answering here. So I want to clarify a few things about this potential homework spot. It's one thing to say we have these needs. I need to buy this piece of equipment. I need to lease a new vehicle. I need to do some remodeling in this particular facility. I need to pay for this new case manager. Those are needs. And so perhaps we would number those financial needs. But grant makers, they don't really like to talk about just the one thing. What we really want to focus on, what are the bigger priorities? And to number those. So for example, I was talking to an organization that is looking at behavioral health and more broadly some healthcare programs. And so as they were thinking about their priorities for the upcoming year, their leadership team for grants gave them 4 priorities. And so behavioral health was number 1. And then they had maternal and fetal health as number 2. And then they had, right, and I don't remember what number 3 and number 4 were, but they had 4 buckets and they were in the order that the senior leadership team said, if the grant maker lets you pick what to apply for, this is number 1, behavioral health. But geez, if you see that a grant maker is looking to support things in maternal and fetal health, it's our number 2 priority. We would pick applying for that and spending time on that more than we would something in priority 4's bucket. So it quickly helps the grant team, the ones who are doing the application work, to sort through all of the applications that are constantly being shared. It helps to prioritize the big applications that you might learn about that you want to spend time pre-planning on, getting ready for those really big applications. So that's why having those priorities clearly articulated in a numerical order is such an important part of grant readiness. I hope that you have a little bit of fun. It's optional homework, right? We're together for 90 minutes. I can't give you homework. That's not fair. There's no way to follow up. But whether you've got a notebook or a pad of sticky notes near you, I would hope that you might consider doing this as an optional homework. Try to get a sequentially ordered list of priorities. And let's say by the end of October, let's see if you could get that so that you could use it moving forward. I'm here as your accountability partner. You can email me or message me on LinkedIn to let me know that you have it. I will send you all the digital high fives and gold stars and ring the dingy bell if you've got that list of priorities. Sound good? All right. Let's think instead about application readiness. So if we're thinking about a particular application, there might be some more registration processes that we have to handle. You might have the big stuff taken care of. You might, IRS stuff, check. You might say, wait, this is a foundation, and where's that portal? What is this that they want? It's not that it's terrible in terms of a registration process, but it is not as fast as saying, oh, I want to buy something online from this vendor, and look, I clicked 2 things and they took my money and my stuff's on the way, right? None of it's that fast. Now, many grant makers are doing multi-factor authentication, right? So having that double verification, the 2-step process for the security of our data, which I do appreciate, but slows down the registration process significantly for some portals. So we might have to tackle that. Also, if we're in some of the government agencies, whether federal or state, they've got their high-level registration, but then sometimes there are nuanced registrations required for agencies or departments. So we might have a second layer that we have to do. So we have to put registration on application specific as well. What else can help us be grant ready as it relates to an application? The internal capacity of not only did we have big picture controls and policies that might be uniform grant guidance? Sure, we could think about that for the whole organization. But do we have the capacity to implement and to manage the funds as required for this particular application? It's one thing to say we have the capacity to write this application. Yep, we can get it out the door, we can click submit, we can click apply. It is a totally different thing to say, yes, as an organization, we have confirmed that we are able to successfully implement this if it is funded and to do all of the management requirements, all of the evaluation requirements. 2 totally separate things. So having an honest conversation with the team about what it is going to take if it gets funded is important up front. Funder relationships belong in the grant readiness category if we're talking about a specific application. Not all grant writers, not all grant professionals feel comfortable reaching out to grant makers. For some, it's not in their job description. It's not what is expected in their organization. It might be someone from leadership or from maybe someone else in the development department that is going to maintain those relationships, do the outreach. But having those connections for some grant makers is the only way that they're even going to send you an application, that they're going to be even willing to read your application. So when we think about applications that say things like, we only fund pre-selected organizations, what does it mean to be grant ready for their specific application? The most important readiness criteria in that particular instance is your funder relationship. Because if they don't invite you, you don't get to apply. So it's important that you think about it with every application. For some applications, it is the only way that you even get to start the game with them. It has to be about the relationship. For some organizations, when you look at a particular application, your collaborations will be your ticket to grant readiness. There have been many applications over the years whether we're talking about federal, state, foundation, that have some form of collaboration that is actually required. Often I'll quote about different grant opportunities that are through the Office of Violence Against Women. Very common that they have legal memorandums of agreement between partners that are required as part of applications. Today, I'm also thinking about CDC and some of the drug-free programs that they have in communities. Long lists of required collaborative partners that must come together, must sign agreements in order for that application to be considered eligible for review and scoring. We've seen it in the COPS program related to stopping school violence. We've seen it in United Way funding programs related to aging in different states. It is a significant thing for some grant makers. They don't want to have organizations trying to do it all on their own. They believe for those big grants that it needs to be multiple players to ensure that everybody that should have a voice is at the table. That's what they're trying to do, is ensure upfront that you've got the right players there. Now, the last one is SMART objectives. Don't worry, I'm not going to make you write SMART objectives today as part of the webinar. I could hear the collective groan. No, that's not today. Another day. But honestly, when we did it in class, that big 8-hour class on Tuesday, it was so delightful to see what folks were writing. But SMART objectives are not our natural way of writing for most of us. It takes a lot of practice to think about what's the right level of specificity. Some of the tricks, like only including one action verb in an objective statement. You find 2 action verbs in your objective statement, break them into 2 separate objectives. Now you might say, Diane, why are SMART objectives part of application grant readiness? Thank you so much for asking. I knew somebody would be thinking that. So the reason it's part of readiness is that if you can articulate about your work, your project, your programs, your services in SMART objective structure, it means that you have enough detail about your program design that you could be ready to write an application about it. If you do not yet have enough information to write SMART objectives, if it's just a big ethereal idea at this moment, wouldn't it be nice if we did type idea, you're not ready for specific applications. You are going to be building the plane while we're flying it. It's really difficult to be ready and competitive in that situation. Like really, really difficult. I'm not saying impossible, but really, really, really difficult. So that's why SMART objectives are a nice indicator that you are ready for a particular application for a particular project or program. So if those are our basic building blocks for the whole organization and for a specific application, what might shift? You already gave me some ideas about what might shift in the chat a little earlier. We heard about turnover. We heard about changes in policies. So I've got a few of the common things that we see change in organizational readiness. Top leadership changes. This is a pretty significant risk to grant readiness. I'm not sure that I'm going to say it is the biggest risk, but it's pretty significant. Have any of you ever been working within an organization at a time when top leadership changed? This isn't asking you about how it went, no judgment, nope, that's not what this is. This is just asking if it's ever happened to you. Have you ever been with an organization as an employee while senior leadership changed, whether planned or somewhat unexpected? Why for yes and for no? Has that ever happened while you were in a role? So it could be that someone had a planned retirement. You're like, we knew it was coming. Still a grant readiness shift risk. It could be that all of a sudden they had a family member that was ill and they decided it was time to step away and prioritize taking care of their family member. And so all of a sudden you're like, whoa, we need an interim leader, right? So I know that this isn't a situation all of you have experienced, but it does, if it happens, waves, all sorts of waves about what could happen for grant readiness in terms of shift, because different leaders have different perspectives on how do we handle partnerships and collaborations. How do we talk about project management and stakeholder understanding and prioritization? What are your personal theories as a leader about revenue diversification, I should say? Some want to be less reliant on grants. Others are okay with a slightly higher % of grants funding their work. There are personal individual philosophies that play into who is your leader and what does that mean for grant readiness. There are also some super technical logistical things that might really rock the boat. The worst is around registrations and portals. Absolutely the worst. And so if there is any pre-awareness that you're going to have a leader change for the organization, you want to touch and update every portal. Have a list of everywhere that you've updated. Have a list. Maybe you already do. Have a list of all your portals and all your passwords. We went in circles with an awesome organization, absolutely awesome organization. They thought that they were squared away. They weren't going to have any problems. They were looking at some government grants, and their leader was correct. But, I think, Michael, your microphone might have come unmuted, if you don't mind. Thank you so much. And so what happened was, as they were thinking about why can't we see the normal buttons in grants.gov? What's wrong here? What they learned was that they had an authorized organization representative who was a support staff for the leader. So they had a few different tiers of things happening, but that person leaving was also just as much of a risk for them as the leader. They thought they had it all set, but there were 2 layers that they had set up in the organization, sort of as a fail-safe, and it actually, whoops, caused some problems. So make sure that you look at all the different components, not just this one person's email that is our leader, especially in SAM.gov and grants.gov. Look at all of your roles when you have a leader who changes. I don't want to have that be stressful. But so yeah, portal stuff, it just takes so much unnecessary time away from the work your organization's trying to do. So be as proactive as you can to minimize those risks. The third item on the far right-hand side of this screen, this is the one that is harder to plan for. Are there any changes in terms of especially priorities? Remember that group that I said, oh, they have 4. Number 1 is behavioral health. Number 2 is maternal and fetal health. And maybe the new leader comes in and all of a sudden is like, I mean, not that those aren't important, but for me, behavioral health is actually number 3, and maternal and fetal health is actually 4. And I'm going to flip 3 up to 1, 4 up to 2, but something about it's different. Okay, now what do we do? There's already pending grants based on the last prioritization. Maybe they're throwing in a 5th priority that you've never even looked for funding for, right? You've got to quickly adapt as an organization. You had a nice plan, but now we need to embrace the agile value of responding to change over following the plan because, well, the leader has told us that maybe some things in our environment have changed and we need to shift our priorities. The way that we can really solve this problem, definitely clear documentation in our organization around, in particular, authorized organization representatives. Having a portal process, it's LastPass, it's some sort of password vault. It is not an Excel spreadsheet. It is not a shared Google Doc, something that meets security protocols, but you have some way that you can take care of all your grant application portals from a centralized location that is accessible by more than 1 person. You do not have to tell me if you already have that in place, but maybe you want to just make a note if that's like a homework thing for you. Excel, document versions, it's an okay step. It is not a secure step. So you might just want to bump that up to the next more IT secure level. Now, there is one suggestion that we've been making more over the last few years, given how reliant everyone is on portals. This won't work quite as well for some of the government portals, but it works pretty well for foundation portals. If you use something like executive director at organization domain name, or board president at organization domain name, whatever the title is of the person who is your final signatory, make that an email address that you use for all the portals. Some organizations will do that, and then they'll have a second application email address that they use that is called grants at. By doing that, they're minimizing how much change needs to happen in each and every single portal when a leader changes. Let me put a quick delineator in the chat box here. How many of you already have in place in your tribal organization a generic leadership email that you use for grant applications? Go ahead and let me know if you do. Y for yes, N for no. Question mark if you are not sure. I get it. It's one more email address, but you can forward, you can filter, right? So there's a lot of ways that we can manage it. This has become a significant stress reducer for organizations that we've watched put it in place. I'm not saying it's a perfect solution, but it minimizes the number of portals that have to be updated if there's a leadership change. So food for thought, or homework to see if there already is one in place. So what else can shift our grant readiness? Well, there were changes in leadership. Now there's changes in finance. Why would that shake our grant readiness? Because finance is usually a really big part of grant reporting and grant management, regardless of what portfolio you have of grant revenue. Finance is a really big part. And so having, whether it's like CFO level or accounts receivable, it doesn't matter who in the finance team shifts. If anyone leaves, if anyone changes more than an internal promotion, right? Anytime there's a change in finance staff, we potentially see some risks. We've got portal issues because sometimes finance, they're given their own accounts for billing, for reporting. So, all right, things could get sticky again. Same thing's going to happen in SAM.gov and grants.gov because there are roles for the grant management folks within those systems. Now, put registrations aside for a minute. An incredibly significant risk that happens for grant readiness is that when there are changes in staff, there might not be clear handoffs, clear transitions of what deadlines are for reports. The project management system or tools in place might not transition from one person to the next, so they might not understand when things are due. That means that you might not help your relationship with the grant maker because maybe you're now submitting things late. But more importantly, you might actually risk your cash flow because if you put in your reimbursement requests late, what's going to happen? How are they going to pay you on time? They're not. They're going to follow their 30-day terms or their 60-day terms. So that's going to put a delay in your cash flow as an organization related to your grant funds. And then the other one, and this, I didn't used to have this on here, but it's happened more than once now. And so I think it's worth talking about. When you have changes in finance staff, it means that folks now have to learn new accounting systems potentially, but they have to, at a minimum, learn more about the organizational activities and the budgets. And so in particular, if it's at like CFO level, we have seen that result in delays for there being an organizational budget that is approved. Now, why does that matter? It matters because the organizational operating budget is so often a grant attachment. So if there is a delay and you don't have an approved by leadership, by a board of directors, annual operating budget, what do you give as a grant attachment? Well, our workaround answer has been, here's last year's with a letter from the president, from the board of directors saying, we're delayed and we expect to approve it at this next meeting on this date. And in the meantime, here's last year's. Not a great answer. It's an okay, I mean, like it's what the situation is and you're being transparent about it. Not really where you want to be. But I don't think that that is what folks are thinking about for a risk when there's a transition at finance. So something to consider again for grant readiness shifts. So what are some of the things that you can do to protect yourself from this being a potential shakeup of your grant readiness? More than anything, think about redundancy of knowledge and skill. So if you can train multiple folks in the basic understanding of grant compliance and management requirements for your funders, make sure that multiple folks can see a grant report and billing calendar. Those are some of the most important things that can ensure that there isn't a whoops, something drops, now something's late, now a grant maker's a little upset. So we want to think about the logistics that way for the handoff. Also, I'm always in favor of a good dashboard. Something that is answering some key questions for others on the grant team or others in leadership in terms of how are we doing for maybe something like grant dollars billed, grant dollars received from funders, something. And it's up to the organization for what they want. But what are the important questions that you want to watch about how the cash is going related to grants, so that you have multiple sets of eyes looking at a dashboard, so that you wouldn't get very far down the road before at least one or two folks would start to ask questions, offer help, try to change things, because it quickly snowballs into a significant cash flow issue if an organization isn't careful. This one might feel pretty close to home. Do you know how important you are as the grant writer, as the grant professional, as the awesome professional who has to write grants? In fact, I'd love to know, what are your titles? Like on your actual job description or in your email signature, what is your title? I'm thinking that some of you might not have the word grant in it. Sometimes people who have to write grants, they're like, that's not my title. It's not what I thought it would be, but that's how we help sustain the programs. That's how we get it done. So I'd love to know your formal job titles. Regardless of what your title actually is, institutionally, you hold so much knowledge, so much. Whether it's about how you use the tools that you track your grants in, or whether it's about the research tools that you have subscriptions to, or doesn't, you have so much knowledge. And so the weight of that knowledge, it's a lot to transfer. And so as a result, pretty common that we see a dip in grant readiness when there is a transition from one grant professional to the next. The times when we have not seen dips in grant readiness is where there is some depth. The grant team that I talked about earlier is a protection against a drop in grant readiness if your primary grant writer, grant professional leaves or gets promoted. No longer a grant writer, now doing other awesome things, whatever might happen. So of course, yes, portal issues could always happen. The grant maker relationship is a big risk. If you are the one who has been building the relationships and you have not brought others in the other colleagues into the relationships, big risk for grant readiness. Same thing with collaborative partners. You might have been the primary contact with those that were collaborating on federal applications. If you were to leave, who would be the contact? You might say, oh no, we always had two people on it. Great. That's not always the case. Often there's single communication pathways. You have a lot of knowledge about language preference. From one program to the next, from one service line to the next, from one project to the next. Even something as simple as acronyms that are preferred or not preferred. healthcare, one word, healthcare, two words. Lots of nuances about how you present your tribal organization to potential grant makers. And the other thing is that grant folks are project managers, whether that's in our job description or not. Yeah, we're project managers. And so that skill, and again, the knowledge of like, how were you tracking? What was in which version? And who are you waiting for feedback from? It's probably a pretty nuanced and personalized system, even if you're like in a bigger digital project management tool. And so that can kind of cause things to stall while folks learn what was your system. So how do we minimize this? Grant team, grant team, grant team. Even if you're leaving the organization and you're moving on to another career opportunity, you still want to see the organization thrive. So if you know you're leaving, doing anything and everything you can to make sure that different members of the grant team have access, especially if we're talking about like our grant calendar or our project management tool. When it comes to grant maker relationships, if you don't already have some sort of pairing system, I encourage you to consider this. So there's you, grant professional, grant writer, grant manager, and then who? It doesn't have to be the same person all the time. It could be the adult day program director. Another time it could be the development director. Another time it could be the director of facilities. Another time it could be your senior leader. But I want you to have at least one other person who has connected with each of your current grant makers. So let's find out, maybe some of you already are following this idea. How many of you already have relationship pairs in place? There are at least 2 people in your organization that are part of the relationship building and stewarding process for your current grant makers. Go ahead, Y for yes, humble brag about it. I'll get the dingy bell ready to ring for you on screen. S if it's sort of, because maybe you've got it for a few, but not all. N for nope, I think I just found a homework spot. And I like that sort of answer because I know, but you're like, oh, I think I've got it for like 2/3. Okay, so your homework is for the others, but we got some yeses. Dingy bell time. Yay, nice job. There is one other thing, and it's sort of like what I mentioned for leaders. Executive director at or board president at is what works to minimize some of the portal strife. Grants at. Having a grants at email address is a wonderful, very tactical, teeny tiny little pro tip. Because now, every time you go to register for a portal, grants at. You go to register for a second portal, grants at. And whether it's you or someone else, doesn't matter. Keep it in your safe, security, IT approved way for your passwords, but now the email address itself isn't changing. Changing the name on an account, that by all other standards is easy. Changing the email address is often frustrating and leads to lots of delays and is absolutely going to make it difficult to maintain application-specific readiness. So grants at. Did I say it? Yep, grants at. Please add that. We don't technically require that all of our clients do it, but we so strongly recommend it and explain why that they've all put it in place because it makes such a big difference for minimizing stress. Now, the last, what could rock our grant readiness a little bit? Leadership transitions. Having those folks who are the champion of your organization, who are seen at community events, who are seen at ribbon cutting ceremonies, who are seen as kind of the voice for who you are and what's happening. That's how a lot of funders get to know you. And so that can be a big deal in terms of just the understood personality and perspective and kind of awareness of the organization. But there are some more technical things that it can impact in the day-to-day grant readiness. So just like having someone in finance leave could make your annual budgeting process slow down and be delayed. If you have senior leadership, board, elders that are changing, and now you don't have the right combination, the right approval, you're waiting for somebody to transition in. If you don't have a way to get your budgets approved, that'll slow things down. Same thing could happen related to registrations and pre-qualifications in the government settings. So ask yourself, what sort of information are we requiring of our senior leaders, if any? I'll go back to New York State and their pre-qualification requirements. Board roster and board resumes or CVs for officers of organizations. If any of those change, those need to be updated. If they're not updated, your pre-qualification status is at risk. Now, are they checking it each and every time against your website? Not worth the risk. So keep your information as current as possible. Think about what else do I have to update in the portal before I go to apply again. And the other thing I like to suggest are more dashboards. What is important to your senior leaders to understand about what's happening with grants in your organization, so that if one or maybe two senior leaders are in transition, there's knowledge across the rest of the organization that can keep things moving and not slow you down for grants. Of those 4 big buckets that kind of rock organizational grant readiness, not that it's anything against our leaders at the higher levels of the organization, grant professional and finance professional, because of the day-to-day things that they're dealing with, are the highest risk for short-term grant readiness. But now on the flip side, not that finance and grant folks aren't awesome and important, but then if you think about it, CEO, leader level, C-suite stuff, overall organizational leadership, changes there, those change strategy. So that's talking more about organizational readiness for where we'll see our shifts. But we need both. To be competitive, we need both. And so I want to highlight, for some of you, you may have heard of this. In fact, you may have actually taken it. Our team, and my goodness, has it been about 10 years? I think it has. We developed a tool called the GRASP tool, and it's a grant readiness assessment. It is free. That's my favorite kind. It is free. It has always been free. It will always be free. And it is a way to answer a questionnaire. It takes about 10 minutes, maybe a little less, and it will give you a score. For full transparency, this is not an AI-driven tool, so it is not automatic. It takes a little bit of magic behind the scenes with our team to make it all work, but you'll get back an image in your email with a report and some links and a score. What is your score? Don't worry, don't compare yourself to other people. I want you to know what your score is. And then when things change, I want you to maybe return to said free tool, answer the questions again, and see, whoa, what happened as a result of that change? Did it change my score or not? They might have a few logistical things to take care of, but if the score stayed the same, or maybe you've been strengthening your grant readiness over the way, it might even go up. That'd be amazing. But totally free for you to go take whenever you need it. If you feel like your grant readiness has had something that would impact it, you can go take the GRASP tool to, again, check in on your grant readiness score. The reason that pausing to think about your assessment, whether it is your personal intuition feeling about it, or whether it is a formal metric score like grant readiness, helps us to think as an organization about how are we growing? How are we strengthening who we are? Different organizations have different ways that they think about making decisions about strengthening their grant readiness. Some organizations that we've worked with over the years love decision matrices. Love, love, love. Others are like, oh, that is too formal and too strict for us to make decisions based on it. No, thank you. In fact, in November, we're doing a strategic go, no-go webinar right here at the Native Learning Center. It's a whole bunch of fun. We use, I'll show you. We have yes, no buttons to help us think about grants. Some folks like decision matrices. Others, nope, not for them. We're going to talk about all sorts of different methods for making those choices. But when we're thinking about our approach to different assessments, how is it that we're going to make decisions that strengthen our grant readiness? Each and every one of you are going to have a different approach. Some organizations want that formality of the metric. Others have a checklist, some basic items. Others say, no, I feel like we're doing really well. We've got a nice strategy, and it's more about how unanimous everyone feels about having a clear direction for a grant-seeking strategy. You know, it's okay. Wide range of things that work for awesome organizations that have a lot of grant success. But I want you to feel comfortable about where your organization sits, what is their methodology or approach to grant readiness, so that as you move through, let's say the next year, I get it. It's not quite the end of 2025. It feels like it's getting close enough that I can say, as you think about your 2026 grant readiness and overall grant seeking, what is it that you can do to feel like you are more proactive instead of reactive in your grant seeking? You might say, I don't know, Diane. What could I do? I'm so glad you asked. I have 12 tips to help you take these grant readiness ideas and think about being even stronger in 2026. More proactive than reactive. Sound like a plan? All right, let's see how this goes. We've got 12. Oh, and also I forgot to highlight again, because this will make sense with these 12 tips. In your public chat, Brianna had already put the link to today's slides for you. The grant readiness guide from our team is also there. So that pairs with these 12 tips that I'm about to give you. So if you haven't already taken that link out of the public chat, you might want to get that for later. Okay. So tip 1. Do you have a current strategic plan? Like that, that's one of the tips. Yes, but there's a caveat. Do you have a current strategic plan? You don't have to answer me in the public chat. If your answer was yes, comma, but, something like, yes, but it's a little dusty. Yes, but it needs to be updated. I'd put that on your homework list for the next year. You want it to be something that is your guiding, your guiding North Star for the organization in terms of grant seeking. If this is our strategic plan, we should be talking about our grant seeking priorities that align with that plan. We talked about registrations and where are they? And do they meet IT security policies and protocols? Let's put them all in one safe, secure place. As a subset of this, do you want to centralize registrations to a grants at email and an executive director or a leader at type email as well? Talk about a stress reduction. That is a nice technique. Might seem like a tiny little detail, and yes, it takes time. So you don't have to do them all on one day. You can slowly work your way through. You might say every time we touch a new portal, that's all we add. When we go to renew something, we'll switch to that. That's fine, but slowly work your way towards those centralized emails and also the centralized place where all of your passwords are securely stored and more than one person in the organization can see them. Speaking of more than one person, tip number 3, having other colleagues that understand it's okay. You don't have to have grant team t-shirts. You don't have to develop a special morning cheer. You don't have to do any of that. It doesn't have to be regular meetings every Monday. It could, it doesn't have to, but having a grant team, the folks that have a stake in seeing grants be successful, that are part of that big high level strategy conversation. You could also have some folks, sometimes I call them friends of the team. That language works for you. Please feel free to use it. They're the folks that come into a grant conversation for very specific applications. So maybe, oh, we're doing one about food insecurity. I'm going to need your help this time. And maybe they don't have to help on a grant again for 10 more months. Fine. So they're a friend of the team, but they are an important part of the grant team for particular applications. So you can have application-specific grant teams if that's helpful in your organization. Grant readiness tip number 4 is that we want to think about our partners. Your partners are awesome. They're actually part of what I would ask you to consider for those rock star qualities you jotted down earlier. I'm thinking your collaborative partners are some of them. And so when we think about those partners, why are they related to grant readiness? Well, one, they might be on our list of rock star qualities that we would want to make sure we have identified before we apply for grants. So at that organizational level, that's actually important. But there's a second part to it. If we're thinking about big grants, big federal, big state, just a monstrous foundation grant, yes, Angelica, you're right. They're subject matter experts. But what happens with partners is that despite best intentions, sometimes they are only involved towards the end. I need a letter of commitment from you. Here's a quick template. Here's a one-page summary of like what we're doing. Could you write a letter of commitment? That is not utilizing to their best strengths their subject matter expertise, their connections, their ideas. So as early as you can engage your partners in a conversation about your strategy, about your priorities, about the whole grant seeking strategy and application specific strategy, you're doing two things. You're strengthening your organizational grant readiness and you're strengthening your application specific readiness. Policies and procedures that are UGG compliant. Yep. That is a homework item in itself. Big one. I get it. How many of you know for a fact that your internal controls and policies, your compliance approach, your grant management work is uniform grant guidance compliant? Do let me know in the public chat if you're willing. Y for yes? Question mark for not sure? Maybe you have to do some homework. Ask some questions. Be curious. You're not being judgmental. I'm not being judgmental and asking. I'm just saying you want to make sure they are. So if you're not sure, if that's not a conversation you've had with any of your colleagues yet, it's a good homework question to put down. Oh, a grant calendar. Okay, wait, let me move. So behind me, wait, which way do I want to move? That way. See, I've got a wall calendar behind me there, behind me at the desk. Yeah. It could be that you create a grant calendar that is literally something on the wall. It's probably going to be bigger than like my small little calendar that I have there. Right? It probably is. But having a grant calendar is having a visual plan that more than one person in the organization can see. So I'm wondering, where is your grant calendar? For those of you that already have one, could you tell me what tool I would look in, or where in your office, where would I look? If I said, hey, I'd love to see your grant calendar, could you show me? What would you show me? Go ahead and let me know in the public chat. And in the meantime, I just shared a link in the chat that tells you, if you weren't sure what a grant calendar is, I just put that blog post in the public chat. And then I'm also going to send a second link. This one is describing the difference between a grant calendar and grant strategy. There are nuances between those two phrases. And so that second link describes those. But so I'm curious, if I asked you, hey, can I see your grant calendar? Where would you take me? What would you show me? I'm tool agnostic. So actually, I just think it's really cool to see the wide variety of places that you're putting your grant deadlines, your grant reports, your relationship outreach, all grant things. Evaluate your impact. Grant readiness tip number 7. If you don't know how your program is progressing, if you don't know how many people you've served, how many hot meals you've delivered, if you don't know what your pre and post-test results are showing, that grant best practice in the grant life cycle, the reporting part, that is going to be sticky. It's going to be hard. It's going to be stressful. It's going to be really difficult to say that you're ready to go back to that grant maker again, or even to ask other grant makers for the same program. So while you technically might not be the person who is doing the evaluation, sort of like those folks on the grant team that aren't writing the grant have a stake in seeing grants be successful, you, as the person writing the grant, you have a stake in making sure that as it is implemented, the evaluation methods that were mentioned, outlined, discussed in the grant application are happening, and that people are tracking progress. Are we on track to meet our outputs and outcomes? Are we behind? Are we ahead? You want to understand the general trends of what the evaluation is showing about the impact that you presented to the grant maker. Grant readiness tip number 8. I feel like I'm on like a late night show. These are not in a particular order. I was going to say they're all equally important, but that would be against everything I say for priorities. But they are not in a super specific, like number 1 to 12 priority sequential order. So it's okay if you say, oh, I need to focus more on number 6 than number 10. Not mad about it. These are 12 for your consideration. What I ask you to think about is the one that is most important for you to pick next to work on. Let me explain number 8. Know your numbers. That sounds like Shark Tank, the TV show, in terms of investment. Know your numbers. Know your numbers for your grant budgets, your program budgets. Know your numbers for how many people you serve or for what your outcomes are. This could go in a lot of different directions. You and other members of your grant team need to know your numbers. This is not all on you, but as a team, you need to understand what does the data tell us? The data about the success of our grant seeking strategy, the data about the programs that are being funded with the grants, the data that shows us how much of a deficit we're in for a program. Lots of different ways that this plays out, but you all need to know your numbers. It shouldn't be just one person that understands them. Your elected officials are really important. They can advocate for you. They can help to clarify things. They can share information. I get that this tip might feel a little bit funny as we're in a government shutdown at the time of this particular live webinar, but elected officials are a big part of overall grant relationships. They can make introductions, they can help advocate. It's not necessarily even introductions within government, but they're really well connected in communities. So they might be that perfect connection to make a warm introduction related to another grant. Do your homework. Do your homework about what is required. Do your homework about what the grant makers are looking for. Do your homework about what is changing in our field. Understand what is happening in terms of AI and how it's changing the game. Even if you don't write with AI, please do use an AI use policy, put one in place. I'm not saying you have to write with AI. I'm just saying that the use of AI is changing the game. Do your homework about what's changing in the field. Don't assume that it's status quo. So be curious, read things, do your due diligence. Being proactive means looking ahead. Not that you want to plan down to the minutia for the plan, but I want you to think about where you want to be in a year, and think about how to break that down into smaller segments, what sort of big grants might be out there. And therefore, geez, I guess if I'm going to do a big grant in March of 26, I should probably start to talk to collaborative partners now, maybe even early November. I don't want to wait till after January. Oh, it's going to feel pretty tight to the deadline. So look really far out. You don't need to know all the details of those big things, but look closer to where you are now and say, what few things could I do to be extra prepared to feel more successful as we move towards those big things? That is what helps make your grant seeking strategy more proactive. And lastly, as we come to the bottom of the hour and our time together, revisit your grant readiness on an ongoing basis. It is not static. I wish it could stay stable. I wish there would never be anything that would influence your grant readiness, but that's not our reality. So refer back to your grant readiness with whatever process, whether it was our GRASP tool or if you've got an internal checklist, but review it, talk about it, try to strengthen it on an ongoing basis with at least an annual review. Now, you've been fantastic in the public chat the whole time, and I'm so grateful for that. I'm here to answer any questions that you may have. I'll watch the public chat, but I'm here whether you want to chat now or if you want to email me later, or if you want to come back to social media and drop me like a direct message on LinkedIn, totally fine. But I'm super grateful for all of you spending this time with me today, and I'll watch the chat again for any questions, but Brianna, I'll pass it back to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Give me one moment. As always, Diane, thank you. We learned so much from you. Thank you for taking the time out to complete this presentation and this training. As far as any questions that you may have for Diane, you can go ahead and drop them in the chat so that you can go ahead and ask her before we close the webinar. Also, I'm going to encourage you all to please complete the survey. I'm going to go ahead and add it in the chat again. The survey only takes about a minute or so, and your feedback does help us do more of what is working well, and it also helps us improve on future webinars. We do invite you to be as candid as you like, as the survey is completely anonymous. So please just make sure that you go ahead and click the link and complete the survey. And of course, we hope that you can join us for our next webinar. It's going to be on October 28th, 2025. And the title is Restoring Balance, Self-Care for Native Serving Professionals. And that will be with the amazing Linnell Smith. So we hope to catch you on the next webinar. We also encourage you to sign up for our email list so that you can always be aware of the exciting webinars that we're going to have in the future, as well as any trainings hosted by the NOC. And also, you can feel free to access this webinar as well as any other recorded webinars at our new Cathedral Webinars archive that's now posted on our YouTube channel. Feel free to view them, and you can also share them with your colleagues and your friends. And also, please check out our upcoming events posted on our various social media. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. We also have an in-house podcast titled the Hopatinga Native American Podcast, where we discuss more focused topics within Native American housing and, of course, self-determination. You can also listen to us on Simplecast, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts, as well as view the video recordings with our guests on YouTube. And once again, thank you all so much for joining us today. And we thank you so much for participating and being active in the chat. We hope that you have a fantastic rest of your day, and we hope to connect with you real soon. I'm going to leave this up for a couple minutes so that you all can just grab the links. And of course, I see some of you are still being, so we'll just wait a couple minutes just in case you all have any extra questions. Thank you, Angelica. Thank you so much, everyone.